The West was warned by Vladimir Putin that he would use all available means to protect his country. The West was warned. He said he wasn't bluffing. We've seen the positioning of nuclear weapons in Belarus, or the plan to deploy them. We have seen the Russians state that they will use nukes if Russia is threatened, if there's an existential threat to this country. We now have many more opinions that we are in World War III popping up on the internet as news breaks that the escalation of war into Russia is getting worse. From the Daily Mail, Moscow running scared. Kremlin evacuates 9 border villages and admits there is cause for serious concern as pro-Ukraine fighters capture territory within Russia's Belgorod region. 2 groups of anti-Kremlin Russian troops have launched attacks on Russian soil. Belgorod was hit by drone strikes overnight, and several settlements were seized. The question is, are these Ukrainian forces? Are these concerned partisan Russians fighting against Vladimir Putin? Could be. Could be all of it, to be honest. Some have expressed concern that the attack in Russia is the result of Western intelligence and insurgency, while many others say these are these are anti-Putin Russians. They love Russia, they defend Russia, but they don't like Vladimir Putin, and they want to put an end to that regime. All of this can be true. Individuals within Russia, obviously sentiment isn't 100% in favor of the war that's going on. So you will get dissidents, you will get partisans. They need only materials to fight, and now you have willing fighters. I'd be willing to bet that the individuals staging the conflict in Russia are Russian, and they're supported by the West. Why wouldn't they be? The scary thing is, if the West has decided, if NATO, the United States, to put pressure on Russia to actually stage attacks using Russian partisans, or any means, honestly, that's it. That's World War III. Russia is not going to just sit there as 9 border villages are evacuated due to war reaching into their borders. And you know what? It doesn't matter what the truth is. It doesn't matter if this was Western forces masquerading as Russians. It doesn't matter if the videos are all fake. It doesn't matter if Vladimir Putin staged a false flag. What matters is the story, the narrative. It exists. Russia was attacked. If Russia is staging a false flag, they'll use this as a casus belli, as a cause for war to accelerate and to escalate. And if it is a legitimate attack on Russia, it'll be even worse. There's a lot to go through here. Let's read this story from the Daily Mail first. Russian authorities have ordered residents of 9 villages in the Belgorod region bordering Ukraine to evacuate their homes after anti-Putin rebel groups began capturing territory on Russian soil. The Kremlin's order comes hours after a pair of explosions rang out in the city of Belgorod overnight amid drone attacks in the FSB Security Service building and Interior Ministry offices. Regional Governor I'm always bad with pronouncing these names. Vyacheslav Gladkov confirmed the aerial bombing raid had caused fires at government buildings and urged citizens to take shelter amid the rebel attacks. Ukrainian military intelligence said 2 armed Russian opposition groups, the Freedom of Russian Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps, were behind the biggest armed incursion into Russian territory since Putin's invasion of its neighbor, Ukraine, recognized as a serious cause of concern by the Kremlin. The attack was seemingly unexpected, with the rebels able to gain control of several Russian towns in a matter of hours. They say an anti-Kremlin volunteer fighter is pictured alongside a captured Russian armored personnel carrier. Got a bunch of photos here. Let me show you the map of the region. We have Belgorod, Russia. I'm going to zoom in here. Let's close that. You can see just north of Kharkiv is Belgorod. So apparently what's happening now, if we were to trust the sources, military forces in Russia, anti-Putin, anti-Kremlin, but Russian, are staging this combat. Now, depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers. Obviously, Russia is going to say that these are Ukrainians supported by the West, et cetera, et cetera. Let's read more. The U.S.-based think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, which is tracking the conflict, said a detachment of Russian rebels consisting of 2 ranks, an armored personnel carrier, and 9 other armored vehicles crossed the international border and captured Kozinka, a settlement of the Graivoron region of the Belgorod Oblast. Several Russian sources claimed the grouping then captured the settlements of Glatovo and Goropodol. While the majority of the Russian military commentators responded with relatively varied concern, anxiety, and anger, the information space did not coalesce around one coherent response, which indicates first and foremost that the attack took Russian commentators by surprise. The Freedom of Russia Legion is a Ukraine-based Russian militia led by Russian opposition figure Ilya Ponomarev that says it is working inside Russia for Putin's overthrow. It said on Twitter that it had completely liberated the border town of Kozinka and forward units had reached the district center of Graivoron, further east. Moving on, Russia will be free, it wrote. Yesterday, the group shared a video on social media in which a handful of soldiers vowed to liberate their homeland from Putin's autocratic rule, while other clips showed anti-Putin rebels posing with flags in front of Russian road signs, calling for an end to the Kremlin's dictatorship. I think this is inevitable. And I do think it is extremely likely and very plausible that there are Russians who are fighting back against Putin. This dude has been in power for decades. It was only a matter of time, whether you like the guy or not. There is sentiment from people in Russia very much opposed to Vladimir Putin. And with the expansion of war on their border, I am not surprised to see this is the news. Sky.com says, did pro-Ukrainian fighters capture a Russian town? What's happening in Belgorod? As smoke is seen rising inside the Russian border, questions still abound about what exactly has happened and who was behind it. Now, we don't know for sure. But upon Googling the story, I saw this from the website responsiblestatecraft.org. I'm not familiar with this website. I don't know much about them. I don't know much about its writer. But they say the West must prepare for Putin to use nukes in Ukraine, while a former U.S. defense attaché to Russia believes Moscow is poised to reach for the ultimate weapon. The reason I'm showing this is, far be it from me to just espouse my opinion. I'll back it up with the opinions of others. Not that I'm saying that's absolute definitive proof of anything, but that I'm not the only one who thinks Vladimir Putin will use nuclear weapons. I am not saying he will launch intercontinental ballistic missiles or multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles with 12 warheads peppering the eastern seaboard and wiping out a good portion of the American people. I'm not saying that at all. And I mean that seriously. I don't think that's likely right now. What I think will happen is Putin will say, turn them to glass. He will drop nuclear artillery, small, lower yield nuclear weapons in Ukraine, especially if there are forces conquering cities, seizing cities in Russia. Now is the most dangerous time. Vladimir Putin looks at this and says, if we are going to stop them from moving into our territory, we need to flatten them in theirs. Nuclear artillery. Here's my concern. The West says, we want to win this war. Here's a tactic we can use. Surge into Russia, forcing a retreat, and then we put the fight into Russia. If you've ever played any first-person shooter video game, which I'm sure many of you have, a team-based shooter or something like that, Call of Duty, to an extent has things similar to this, or Overwatch, you know, in these games, if you're fighting on the line, you're not taking the territory you need. If you surge past the opponent to their territory, you force them to retreat. This could be the tactic with the attack in Belgorod. And then, of course, Vladimir Putin responds in kind by one-upping the ante. If you are sending your people into our territory to fight and take our cities, we can ignore it and push forward. But then our cities are being laid siege. So what do? I think we're dangerously close to him saying, give him a small taste. Low-yield nuclear artillery. Flatten one area in this war. And that would cause a very, very decisive retreat. And how would the U.S. respond? This is the danger. I do not believe that the West is capable of retaliating against Putin for the use of tactical nuclear artillery. Or I should say, I should just say nuclear artillery because I don't want to confuse the issue with tactical nukes and strategic nukes and et cetera. Here's the issue. There was a question raised about should Vladimir Putin use nukes? What would the West do? And many people said mutually assured destruction. No, maybe that applies to if he fires a nuke at DC or something. But if he uses low-yield nuclear weapons in Ukraine to seize territory, no one would sacrifice a town in Europe, a city, for Ukraine. That was what many advisors had said, many commentators in Europe. They said, you really think Belgium is going to risk a nuclear strike over Ukraine? Nope. If Putin retaliates with nuclear artillery in Ukraine, that's the extent of it. And there's nothing anyone else can do. Now, you'll get rallying cries. You may get formal declarations of war. You may see a surge of Western power into Ukraine. But no one in the EU or the US will accept the use of nuclear weapons for the sake of Ukraine if retaliation, if it means we get nuked. Now, I'll tell you my bigger fear. False flags. The most effective thing Vladimir Putin could actually do is stage an attack on his own cities. What if these attacks by these anti-Kremlin Russians, they're actually Russians working for Putin? And now he has a casus belli. The West is supporting an invasion of our homeland. Please, people of Russia, stand up. And then he can go to China. He can go to other countries, Iran, and say, it's after us, it's you. And then what? That's the scary thing. Responsible Statecraft writes, since Russia invaded Ukraine last February, President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly suggested that he could use nuclear weapons in the conflict. In September, the Russian leader declared that he wasn't afraid to use all the means available to us to win the war. I'm not bluffing, Putin added. These declarations have at times been met with actions that imply Putin is preparing to launch tactical nukes. Last month, the Kremlin announced that it planned to deploy such weapons in Belarus, placing them in close proximity to the front lines in Ukraine. These nuclear threats have set off a torrent of debate over whether Putin would really cross the Rubicon and make Russia the second country to ever employ the ultimate weapon on the battlefield. Many analysts argue that the threatening moves are meant to deter deeper Western involvement in the conflict, though they disagree over whether and how to call the Russian leader's bluff. But Brigadier General Kevin Ryan, retired, sees things differently. For Ryan, the question is not a matter of if, but when Putin will reach for the nuclear button. In a recent article for Russia Matters, the former U.S. defense attaché to Moscow argued that with options for conventional escalation disappearing, the Kremlin is all but certain to resort to nuclear use. I agree. I'm not an attaché or anything like that. I'm just some dude who's reading the internet. But I see this stuff and I'm like, that's what it seems like to me. This guy knows way better than I do, Brigadier General Kevin Ryan. And if he says that, I'm like, hey, man, my biases point in that direction, too. Is this guy wrong? Perhaps. Confirmation bias is a real thing. I'm certainly not reading the news articles where they say it'll never happen, am I? I'm reading the guy who says a thing that I already agree with. So I'm telling you that because maybe things do not get worse. They say Responsible Statecraft spoke with Ryan, who is now a senior fellow at Harvard University's Belfer Center, to learn more about why he believes Putin will use a tactical nuke against Ukraine. He says, at its most basic level, when Ukraine mounts its counteroffensive, if they have significant success in taking back territory that Russia has occupied, then the Russian military will be expected to escalate their operations to prevent that or to counter that. Putin will demand it. This article is from yesterday. We got news yesterday about Belgorod. I wonder if this crosses that line. We're moving in that direction. Washington Post says anti-Putin militias mount cross-border incursion in Western Russia. I don't believe the Washington Post. So when they say anti-Putin militias, partisans, I think Western-funded insurgency. I could be wrong. I don't know. Belgorod governor urges Graveron residents not to return home from CNN. Anti-Putin Russians say they launched a cross-border attack from Ukraine. Here's what we know. From BBC, Belgorod raid, insurgents defeated after rare cross-border incursion. And this is one of the latest updates. They say, armed insurgents who crossed the border from Ukraine to launch attacks in Russia's Belgorod region have been defeated, Moscow says. And now this is the BBC reporting this definitively. Villages in the border region were evacuated after coming under sustained shell fire. Russia says that 70 of the attackers have been killed and insists the fighters are Ukrainian. But Kiev has denied involvement, and 2 Russian paramilitary groups have said they were behind the incursion. Monday's raid appears to have been the largest cross-border incursion since Russia's full-scale invasion. It led Moscow to declare a counter-terror operation in Belgorod, giving the authorities their special powers to clamp down on communications and people's movements. The measures were lifted on Tuesday afternoon. Russia's defense ministry said a unit of the Ukrainian nationalist formation invaded its territory and were responsible for heavy shelling on the Kozinka checkpoint at the Grevoronsky district in the Belgorod region on Monday. In a statement published on Telegram on Tuesday, the ministry said 70 Ukrainian terrorists had been killed and the rest of the fighters had now been driven back to the Ukrainian border. But Ukrainian officials said those behind the incident were from groups called the Liberty of Russia Legion and Russian Volunteer Corps. There is video of this. I don't speak Russian, so I don't know for sure. But there is a video of individuals that I believe this is the article that from the Daily Mail. The video shows men claiming to be Russian fighting for Russia. Yes, we have it right here. So I'll just show you. Now, I don't speak Russian, so I don't know for sure. I don't know who these guys are. I don't know if they're Russian. They're wearing, you can clearly see the Ukrainian patches, although I think someone's got one upside down. Maybe they meant West Virginia. Go WVU. They use the same colors, huh? And this is a man saying that in Russia, a person's life means less than an official's wallet. A separate railway is being laid to the residence of the bunker grandfather. I don't know what they're trying to say. Maybe this is legit. Maybe it's not. It's the fog of war. We don't know. That's the scary reality. Now, Moscow says they've driven them back. And that could be a good thing. That can be the news we're hoping to hear. Because the last thing that we want is an escalation to the use of nuclear weapons. But I do think it's fair to say World War III is upon us. It's not the first time someone has said this. I believe the Pope even said it. But when Russia is being invaded in any fashion, do you think it ends with them just saying, oh, gee golly, please don't do it again? Or do you think this now goes to a much darker place? I wonder when China makes their move, because I kind of feel like China right now is taking a look at all this, and their attitude is kind of like, if Russia can cause enough disruption and drain enough of their resources, we move on Taiwan. I think they're kind of biding their time. They're watching Russia and the West fight. And they're like, we don't need Russia to win. We need Russia to just shake them up a little bit. I think if Russia uses a nuke, China slams Taiwan instantly. Because the moment Russia fires any kind of nuclear weapon, low-yield nuclear artillery, it's going to tangle the West up, and China's going to have a very, very, very good opportunity. Because that's it. If Russia uses a nuke, 100% of the attention of the West will be on Russia and Ukraine, period. The whole world will shift their focus. And China has already had its eyes on moving into Taiwan. They've already been making some attempts, flying overhead, launching missiles surrounding the small island nation, which is originally the real Republic of China. What happens then? If the U.S. can't defend Taiwan, then the U.S.'s allies in Southeast Asia will be rattled and worried. Japan's been building its military for the first time since World War II. It seems like everyone's gearing up for a major fight. And I'm not surprised. After World War II, the world changed. There was a world order that was new. They called it the liberal economic order. Read the CFR website. They talk about it. They say this new world order was formed to stop a World War III from happening. If another world war happens, the world will be transformed greatly. I believe that if World War III does occur, afterwards, you will have a one world government because you will have the complete rapid transformation of all of these different governments around the world. And someone's going to win a nuclear conflict, which will devastate the planet. And it will result in the dominant force saying, you will all do as we say. And you know what? I think people will lay down. They will say the world nearly ended. We will not allow it. That's how they felt with World War II. But we did not have the massive amount of power that we have now, not just with nuclear weapons, but with cyber warfare. They can take out power grids, killing millions in days. If the power shuts down, it gets bad, and it gets bad fast. We as a people of the world are propped up by our technology. And if it's stripped from us, it's not that we're incapable of survival. It's that we're ill-adapted to it based on the tools that we've developed. So if all of our food spoils and we no longer have cellar storages, if we no longer have animals to eat because we've become reliant on mass farming, the power goes out, it's an abrupt shock, and people die. That's what I fear. And I fear that the use of nuclear weapons would escalate it to a point where, man, if Russia uses a nuke, don't be surprised if the U.S. reinstates the draft. And it may sound extreme, but I mean it. And they'll come out and they will say, the world is on the brink of annihilation. Nuclear weapons are being launched. It's now or never. But how many people in this country are willing to fight for a woke corporate empire? Not that many. And therein lies the big challenge for the U.S. It could just mean the crumbling of the U.S. empire. Fine. I don't know for sure. It's just one moment, a flash in the pan, but significant. Will Russia escalate following the incursion into Belgorod? We'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.